Bună ziua tuturor! Bine ați venit la Elefant Fest, unde continuăm dialogurile cu autori de bestselleruri îndrăgite din toată lumea. Sunt Monica Grecu, redactor coordonator al colecției Untitled de la editura Litera și îmi face o deosebită plăcere să o am ca invitată astăzi pe scriitoarea americană Renée Rosen. Dintre romanele ei, două, și anume Cele două grații și O vară la New York, au fost publicate în limba română de editura Litera. So, Renée, welcome to this dialogue for our readers.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here with you all.
It's a great pleasure for us. And I would like to start by asking you what the main literary influences were in your youth.
So I probably didn't get really, even though I was writing from the time I was a young girl, I didn't get really serious about reading until probably the 1980s. And I think that's when I discovered Mona Simpson and Michael Cunningham and Susan Minot and Donna Tartt. And these were all writers who had like big splashy debuts, and they were such gorgeous, gorgeous writers. And those were probably my earliest influences.
What about the books that you were reading as a child or as a teenager?
I read, all the Nancy Drew books. And I think the one book that I really loved as a little girl was Blueberries for Sal. I don't know if they have that in Romania, but I read that book over and over again. And then as I, sort of matured a little bit in my reading, I started gravitating more towards, I guess, more literary fiction, I would say.
So, yeah, you're sort of anticipating my next question, which is how your literary taste changed in time. And if you have reading recommendations for various age groups, I don't know, preteens, teens, young adults, what we are trying to do a lot with our publishing house is encouraging young people to pick up reading and continue, so they develop into long-term, lifelong readers.
Yeah.
So what to start with?
Well, so the first question you asked was how my tastes had changed. And I think it's been, especially as I've done more and more of my own writing, I have a greater appreciation of an author's sense of structure, character development, and just like the sheer poetry of the line per line construction of the book. I love a beautiful sentence. It's why I'm such a slow reader. I will stop and just marvel at someone's insight and the depth. So that has definitely matured as I've matured in terms of my appreciation of it. And it's funny, I am not a huge consumer now of young adult books and things like that. But when I think back on some of the most important young adult books, they're really the classics. It's like The Catcher in the Rye, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, To Kill a Mockingbird. Those were all actually young adult books. Maybe it's because they have the young protagonists, but, I think those are great books to treasure and can really give a young reader a great foundation. Some more contemporary books would be The Matchbook Castle by Keir Graff. And I do have a young person in my life, and she is a huge, huge fan of the Percy Jackson series. So she just can't get enough of those. But I also think that whatever you're reading, as a young person is absolutely, it's to be encouraged, because it's only going to expand your mind and, urge you on to find more authors and more books. And, it's just a wonderful, wonderful world to get lost in.
Okay. Now, let's go a little bit to your process, your writing. What is your favorite spot for writing?
My favorite spot, it used to be the couch. as long as I'm in my bathrobe, I'm really happy. That's when I do my best writing. But we recently moved. All I had in our old home was just my couch. And I was always hunched over and writing. And now I actually have a desk and a little writing nook. And I have all my research books there, and I can turn just a little bit, and I have a great view of downtown Chicago. And it's just my safe little place that I can work and just go into a zone.
When you start writing a book, how do you find inspiration? Where? How does this book start?
It takes a village, let me tell you. And it's ironically, I'm kind of at that threshold right now of I just turned in a new book. And so it's like, okay, what am I going to do next? And I usually, will huddle with my agent and my editor, and we'll tease through a bunch of ideas. But the actual germ of the idea can come anywhere. Like the book that I just turned in came from a friend of mine who said, just drop the topic right in my lap. I was like, oh my God, I never would have thought of that. Sometimes it's from reading. Sometimes I'll catch a news story or something really weird we have the History Channel here, and there'll be some little obscure nugget that will just sort of get in there. I find that when I go searching for a topic, it's a lot harder. I think the best topics find you. When you go searching, it's tough.
So once you get the idea, the budding idea, how important is then documentation for the backbone of a book?
That is such a great question, because I think that, what you call documentation, I would call research, sort of interchangeable. But because I write historical fiction, I really need that foundation. And I think it's crucial. And I do know writers who hand their documentation off to an intern or to somebody else. And I could never do that, because I will find the quirkiest, strangest little detail, and it will just give me a whole new understanding of that time period, or a great idea for a scene or a theme. And to me, that is one of the great pleasures of writing historical fiction, is that I get to learn about a new time period, a new world with each new book. And, I'll always, I just get lost. And do I go down rabbit holes? Yes. Will I spend hours looking up some detail about what a telephone looked like in 1927? And I'll never use it. But that's all part of the gig. So
how long do you spend researching for a book on an average?
An average would probably be about 8 months or so. But I will tell you this, that each book, the process has dictated itself. Each book has been very, very different. I did a book about the birth of Chicago blues and the civil rights movement, for example. And I had to just put the pen down and go off and do my research before I could write anything. I just didn't understand enough about the music or the culture or what was happening. Other books I kind of do simultaneously, where I'm researching and writing at the same time. But usually it's a good 8 months. The blues book took longer. And I just did a book, The Social Graces, was a lot more intense research, just because the layers of etiquette for each scene, I had a stack of books that I had to go through to figure out, okay, what was the calling card about? What would they wear? How would the seating be? All of that.
So, what is for you as a writer? What is more rewarding to create, the background or the characters?
For me, it's definitely the characters. Even if they're based on a real person, getting to know those characters is such a wonderful journey, because you never know, and I sound crazy, but my characters do talk to me. And, so it's really like getting to know a new friend, or just, and if they're not a likable character, just somebody really, really interesting to me. And I do not know how they're going to develop. So it's really fun to watch them sort of either return, come back to life, or just take shape if they're a fictional character.
So what you're saying basically is that the characters grow by themselves, I don't know, organically somehow. You don't draw them very clearly from the beginning.
Not at all. Like, I don't outline. If I did outline, my life and my editor's life would be much easier. But I can't stay. I would never be able to stick to it. And I tend to write in layers. So my first draft is very, very loose. And once I get to, breathe a certain amount of life onto the page of those characters, I have learned through the years to take my hands off the wheel and let them dictate and tell me their stories. Because I sound crazy, but I do believe that they have a destiny to fulfill. And the less I interfere with that, the better the journey is for them and for the reader, I think.
Exactly. This is what I was thinking about when you were talking about your process, is that for the readers, it's really interesting to see, to understand how the writer's mind works, because it gives them a sort of insight into how this new world is created, where all those characters live. So what would be a piece of advice for a budding writer? Where to start, what to be aware of, maybe a word of caution, if you want.
I think that everybody will tell you write and read, and that's absolutely crucial. But there's so many other things that I would just love to say to anyone who has a dream to write or thinks they might be able to do it. There's no right or wrong way to do it. I have no idea what I'm doing. Each book is like a first book for me. I still make horrible mistakes. My personal process is to write about 100 pages and toss it, because either I've got the wrong point of view characters, or I haven't found the right jumping off point. Anyone, if you have the desire, I think that's one of the most important ingredients to being a writer. I have no business being a writer. I am a horrible speller. I'm a slow reader. I don't really know grammar, but I love storytelling. And, I guess it's kind of a bold statement to say, I'm going to sit down and write a novel or a short story. But if you have that yearning inside you, you need to do that and know that there's no wrong or right way. I always tell people, writing a book or a short story is not like opening up a can of soup and just pouring it out, and heating it up. It's a journey, it's a process, and be patient with yourself. And I think the one thing that people do not really talk about is you have to believe that it's going to happen. If it's happened for me, if it's happened for a friend or somebody else, it can happen for you. And you need to really believe in the process, trust yourself, and never, ever give up. You never know what path you'll be on, but you're the only one that can say, I'm not going to do this. Nobody else can stop you. So believe and go forth.
Really nice and very encouraging. Okay, now let's talk a bit about the books that we published in Romanian. The first one that we published was The Social Graces, and I found it very interesting because we somehow read a lot about the Victorian period in England, but we haven't seen or haven't acknowledged so much about the Gilded Age in the literature which is published generally in Romania. So my question is, how did you revisit the story about the feud about the two great ladies, Alva Vanderbilt and Caroline Astor? How did you get to this topic? That was one. And the other one is, what were some of the interesting tidbits, let's say, that you found in your documentation? Maybe some of them that didn't make it into the book.
Yeah. So again, I had just finished writing Park Avenue Summer, which also came out in Romania, and there I was with my agent and my editor going, what are we going to write next? And we were throwing out all kinds of topics. Like, was I going to jump on the World War II wagon and do a World War II story? And the next day, my editor said, well, what about Gilded Age? And then I got an email from my agent, like immediately after, saying, what about Consuelo Vanderbilt? And so I know a sign when I see one. So I started doing some research, and it was just so obvious to me that this fight between Mrs. Astor and Alva Vanderbilt, like, why has no one ever written this story before that I knew of? Mm-hmm. And so that was really where the germ of it came from. And then I gave myself the kiss of death, because when I was doing research, I said to my editor, oh my gosh, this material is so rich, no pun intended, this book is going to write itself. And this book was the hardest book for me to write. I rewrote it top to bottom 3 times.
Wow.
So before I could figure out how to tell it.
And you were talking a bit earlier about having to do a lot of research for it because of all the layers of etiquette and it's a world and an age that nowadays readers really don't know and don't understand. And how did you feel about this?
Being such a young country, that it was after the Civil War, really, and going into the 1800s, that all of a sudden these people, these families, came into enormous wealth, and they just couldn't spend it fast enough. And the amount of, just ostentatious showiness was overwhelming. And, you had asked me previously, what surprised me in my documentation. And, I don't know how familiar people are with the Vanderbilts in Romania, but in the United States, that's a household name. Everyone knows the Vanderbilts, and you always think of wealth when you think of the Vanderbilts. So the fact that the Vanderbilts were not in society was really shocking to me. I didn't realize that there were 2 camps in society. There was the old money, or the Knickerbockers, and then there was the new money, or the nouveau riche. And the old money did not want all this flashiness. They were very refined, very conservative, and they had very, lovely homes, but they were not showy at all. And, all of a sudden in comes all the gilding and the marble, and, so that was really, really surprising. And another thing that was really surprising to me was, and I thought was rather ingenious of these women, was this whole concept of society. Because it didn't exist before then. But if you were a woman in the United States in the 1800s, you couldn't vote. You had very few rights. You didn't have your own money. You couldn't own land. The only thing they had was this thing called society. And it was the only place where a woman could exercise any sort of influence. So if she was the hostess, she got to figure out the guest list and the menu and the flowers and the party favors. And it was, the more celebrated the hostess, the more powerful the woman. And of course, no one was more powerful in that time period than Caroline Astor. So that was really surprising to me. And then there were all kinds of little things, like if you weren't married, you couldn't wear a tiara. That was a big no-no. That would get you knocked out of society so fast. That and wearing diamonds during the daytime. That was strictly an evening thing. And there were all these quirky little details. And, if somebody ate their peas with a fork rather than a fork and knife, that was a no-no. I mean, really, really things that are just so silly to us now, but they were really of great importance back then.
Yeah. This was 170 years ago or thereabouts, and society has changed a lot. And talking about changes in society, here we are back in New York in the 1960s this time.
Yes. I jumped around a lot.
I know you wrote this book before the other one, but we published them in the reverse order. However, this one was really what I found interesting was a review. Someone said it was Mad Men meets The Devil Wears Prada. And I thought it was, I read this review before reading the book. And I was really thinking about what the characters would be like. Who would they be? How the whole dynamics would be. And what I found interesting was that the person of Helen Gurley Brown is nothing like the magazine editor from The Devil Wears Prada. She's actually an essentially good person.
Yeah.
So how did you see the condition of women in powerful positions? We're talking about the 1960s where things were changing.
Yeah.
And how did you get to, how did you stop basically to write about this particular character, and how did you see her in her office and surrounded by all those people?
Well, I had a secret weapon when it came to writing about Helen Gurley Brown, because, when I first began my research, Helen Gurley Brown was almost a caricature of herself. She was this, she was so outrageous. She spoke about sex the way other people talked about the weather. She was unflappable. And then I was introduced to a woman who regarded Helen Gurley Brown as her second mother. So she was Mommy Helen. And Lois Cahill is her name. And we were introduced, and she sort of took me under her wing. She shared stories with me about Helen Gurley Brown. She shared letters and photographs and all kinds of details about Helen Gurley Brown, like that she did eat her salads with her fingers, and that she always had runs in her stockings, and her wigs were always a little off kilter, and there's always lipstick on her teeth. And so Lois would say to me, back to your point about The Devil Wears Prada, when she was vetting the book, she would say, you're starting to sound too much like Anna Wintour, who, of course, was the editor of Vogue. That was not Mommy Helen. Mommy Helen was sly. and Helen Gurley Brown was a woman who, she took on all the men at Hearst, at a time that women did not have those kinds of positions. It's still tough for women today. For women, men seem to be able to say no. Women, we don't get that no is a complete sentence. We have to explain and apologize. And so for Helen Gurley Brown to be able to balance both, she was a velvet hammer. So she was tough, but she was still very vulnerable. And, did cry copious amounts of tears, but she was strong. For such a tiny little, figure, she was very, very strong and determined. And, but I think she was a rarity in the 60s.
from the way you describe her, it looks like she was actually empowering other women around her.
Absolutely.
So this is something that transpires from the book, and I think it's a valuable lesson for young professionals who start their career to be around people who help them grow, and that they could sense as a mentor, or as someone who could give them something valuable to continue.
Yeah, that was definitely part of her MO, was to empower the women around her.
How did you document this book, Park Avenue Summer? And the reason why I'm asking is that it's closer history. So did you find, I don't know, maybe resources other than written? Did you find videos or audio recordings?
Like all of the above. I was fortunate in the sense, Lois Cahill was a big piece of that puzzle, but Helen Gurley Brown had written so much about her own life, so I had that as sort of a starting point. And then there were a couple of biographies that were really, really wonderful about her. I spoke to people who had worked in the magazine industry in that time period, and videos, because she had a very distinctive way of speaking, and she was always on talk shows. So there was tons. I could go to YouTube and find just tons and tons of interviews with her. But I live in Chicago, so this was a really tough part of the research. I had to go to New York and just eat and drink my way through the city. So I went and I saw where Helen Gurley Brown's apartment was. I went to the Russian Tea Room and 21 and the St. Regis and all the places, that there were scenes in the book. I had to go and sample the goods and see. And then I also went to the Upper East Side of New York, because in the 1960s, that was called the Girls' Ghetto, because there was such an influx of young women coming to New York, to seek career opportunities. So I actually found the apartment that Allie would have lived in, and saw the air shaft that she looked out over. I took the route that she would have taken into work. And, I like to really, you talk about documentation, I like to see it, feel it, touch it. Same reason with In the Social Graces, I went to Newport, Rhode Island, and saw the old mansions that the Vanderbilts had lived in and where Carolyn Astor was. And I just think that that's the only way to really bring that authenticity into the books.
And the books read authentic.
Thank you.
And this brings me on to the next question, which is, which of your novels would you like to see made into movies? And why that particular book? Because they both, the ones that I've read, they are both very, I could see them, I could see the movie before my eyes as I'm reading them. But which would you say?
Well,
movie candidates?
I think, I would love to have all of them, go to film or TV. But, like The Social Graces, for example, I don't know if you have it in Romania, but HBO just did the Gilded Age, which is the same man who created Downton Abbey. So that story's been told, but it was really fun to watch all those mansions and everything and that era come back to life. But I could definitely see Park Avenue Summer, as I just think the fashion would be really fun.
Yeah.
The characters are, Helen Gurley Brown. I don't know who would play her, but I think she would be a fascinating subject. And just the music, and sort of like a Mrs. Maisel, just that. Yes. I just think it would be a fun thing to watch unfold.
I love Mrs. Maisel.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, please tell us a couple of words about your next book project.
So I'm really, really excited. I just turned it in. It's called Fifth Avenue Glamour Girls. And it is the story about Estee Lauder, the cosmetic icon. And I don't want to give too much away, but she had a very, very juicy and complicated past. And just like I did with Park Avenue Summer, I've introduced a fictional character who the story unfolds through her, but it basically takes you from 1938 when Estee Lauder was basically making face creams in her New York apartment and then selling them in beauty parlors all throughout New York, to landing her first real account at Saks Fifth Avenue in 1946. So it's between 38 and 46. So the Depression and then World War II and then post-World War II era. And it goes into the cosmetic industry and Helena Rubinstein and Elizabeth Arden and, you know, all the crazy stuff that went on in the makeup industry and in retail stores in that time period. So it's a fun romp. I probably had more fun working on that book than any other book. So I'm really excited.
It sounds really, really exciting. So looking forward to reading it. Okay. So we're reaching the end of our interview, unfortunately. But could you please tell a couple of words to our Romanian readers?
Yeah. First of all, I am so humbled and appreciative of you publishing my work. That blows my mind. Something else, and I hope I can find the words for this. Monica and I were actually discussing this briefly before we started recording. And you know, yes, I'm in the States here, but and I think I speak for so many Americans, that we see what is happening to your neighbors in Ukraine, and it's heartbreaking. And, you know, this is a community of readers and writers. And, you know, when you just feel that helplessness and your heart is breaking, I personally have always found comfort in books and in writing. And I hope that you at least will have that escape when you just can't turn off the news and you can't. Books are just a wonderful way to make sense of the world and make sense of things that are senseless and find an escape and comfort. So that is my wish for all of you. And I pray for peace and a peaceful resolution to all this as quickly as possible. So that's my message.
Thank you very much, Renee. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And we're looking forward to reading more of your books.
Thank you so much.